And back our shutter. Cock the shutter. Fit the retard gear train in place. Make sure this lever is pulled back so it's not trapped. A small screw at this end. This is where you make your adjustment to adjust the speeds. I'll nip those up. I've got to adjust the speeds yet, but you've got to start somewhere. The self-timer, fit that in place. That drops in. Single screw at the end. It seems good. Let's cock this. Alright. That seems good. Let's do that again. Set the self-timer. Run the self-timer down. Seems to run nicely. So, let's carry on. This cocking ring here, I've run some molybdenum paste around the inside, around the outside. You don't need much, you just need a tiny smear. Get that over the post. Pull this round into position. The tab on the self-timer needs to be behind that ring. Here we have the cocking shaft that comes through. Fit that into position. Get it correctly engaged. Here we go. Now, the flash speed settings can go on. Make sure the B lever is not trapped underneath. That all looks good. Now, if I cock that shutter, will it work? Where's my gear? Cock the shutter. It's cocked, set to an 1/8 of a second. What sort of a speed do we get? Much too fast. So that means I've got to move in the retard gear train for greater engagement with the cam. We'll cock the shutter, loosen the adjusting screw here, move the retard gear train inwards. It won't take much, which is just as well because there's not far for it to go. Let's spring on the post. Shaft in, position that correctly, put the shutter speed cam plate in place, cock the shutter, let's cock the shutter, release it. It seemed a bit fast still. Let's check that. What's happening here? Oh, that's not sitting in place correctly. I'll just put the retainer clip on here, I think. Set to an 1/8. Oh, that's good. Yeah, it must have slipped round to the 15th setting before. Let's check the 15th setting. That's 15. Oh, that sounds good. And an 1/8. Yep, that sounds good to me. I'll test that, but I think that's probably just about right. Yeah. Any marks on those blades? Just some tiny marks there. Let me see if I can get rid of those. Fleck of something on the blade there. And there. That's good. That shutter is good, and that's ready to go back onto the camera. Of course, I've got to check the speeds, but I'm not expecting any problems there. And the cam, it goes on here. That's good. Now did that shutter release? Oh, it worked like that, the shutter release, didn't it? Yep. Okay, I need to have a look at this front mount. It works pretty smoothly, but I might as well check that. So I'm going to put some acetone under here and see if I can melt the adhesive and lift that off. Just putting a bit of acetone around the edge, hoping it'll soak in underneath. Toothpick here, see if I can pry this ring up. Yeah, it's certainly flexing, so it's coming loose. Alright, I'll put a there it is, it's off. It's important not to make a mess of this, because it looks ugly if you've put any crease or bend in it. You'll never get it clean again. You'll never get it dry dead fat. That red paint's from the back. That's where there was a red dot in that hole in the thing, and you can see that it's run everywhere, either from the acetone that I've put there or whatever solvent somebody else has used in the past to achieve the same thing. and get all this nice and clean. Pop that to one side and get all the glue and rubbish off here. I'll do our red dot again when we're finished. Now I can see that these collars here are adjustable, and they'll be adjustable, I would say, for the making sure that the lens mount is the correct distance from the film plane. Well, I'm not going to disturb anything there, I'm just going to remove our 3 screws and hopefully we'll be alright. Now there's some sort of detent in here, a ball most likely, and perhaps a spring, most likely a leaf spring of some sort. Be careful not to lose anything. Lift this off gently. This mechanism is what holds the lens in place. And here's our detent, it's that little spring tab there, and it picks up on these spots. So I'll take these off and clean them. This grease is a bit dried out, and it's picked up a bit of dust and dirt over the years, so I'd rather like to clean those. Now this front plate will be painted. It's not polished alloy, it'll be painted, so I'm going to use some naphtha here. I don't want to use acetone or something, it could damage that paint. And I'm just wanting to remove all of that old grease, because it'll have a lot of dust and so forth in it. Graphite grease is hard to remove completely. It leaves its stains on everything you touch. An odd golden colour to this. Not sure what's done that. Might have been some fault in the electroplating. Just sprung into place. It's well lubricated with graphite grease by the looks of it. Probably more than I want it to be. Okay, these components are pretty clean now. Let's do the speed setting ring. Yeah, that's all thick with graphite grease. Okay, so this part, it's certainly a snug fit. So this bayonet mount, I've had this apart, I've cleaned it, it's working quite well. I'll pull it apart again and show you how it goes. But basically, with the Agfa, there's a notch in the back of the lens that couples with this tab here. Basically you insert the lens, rotate the lens, and that piece there rotates. As it rotates, these three tabs are pulled in, and those tabs lock into this groove at the back of the lens. If you hold the release button down and rotate the lens back again, basically the tabs are retracted and you can remove the lens. So it's a very simple arrangement. It's not exactly a bayonet, but it works like a bayonet for all practical purposes. What happens is that three tabs just come in and latch into the back of the lens. So this was very stiff and reluctant to move. I'll show you what it's like on the inside. There's not much to them. I have to say that another example I have here, my own Ambi-Silette rather, the lens mount is a bit easier to move. Let's lift this off. Here's our shutter speed settings ring. And this little tab here is the detent for our shutter speeds. So we've got these three blades here, or catches that hold the lens, and they're just pivoting on those points. And here we have this piece. Now these 3 tabs, this just fits into a groove on the back of this plate. Those 3 tabs are sprung in a little bit. I just pulled them back out into place there. And this is the action. So if it's stiff, you've probably got too much tension on these. In other words, you need to pull them out slightly. Or there's a rough spot there somewhere that needs to be dealt to, and it needs some lubricant of some sort. In this case I used, I just put molybdenum paste on there. So if I pop this back on, get these back in place. Pop my shutter speed ring back on here. And these 3 pins couple to those arms. If I can get that all correctly sitting there, that looks right. I'll pop the 3 screws back in. Yep, my shutter speed detent sounds good. If we try the lens mount, that clips into place. Hold down the button and lift out the lens. So that's it. So the lens mount's dealt with there. I'm just check I've got my 3 screws tight. And here, I'm just checking, this is the coupling for our rangefinder, and that fits from the rear. It fits from here. So before I put the shutter on, I've got to remember to put that in place. And our little cover here has to fit on and be glued in place. Just a couple of spots of glue to hold that down, making sure that the hole here where the rangefinder coupling comes through is clear. And once this is in place, I'll put a little drop of red paint into that spot there. But this shouldn't take long. Anytime you're applying small amounts of glue to something, it's easiest if you apply a blob of glue to a piece of paper. Then apply that to the piece you're wanting to stick down. I'm just making sure I know where everything goes here. I think there would be a good spot. I don't really want the glue going where the screws are fixed here, because it could create a problem later on. Alright, so I've got my adhesive in 3 spots on my trim ring. And I'll just fit that in place. I want to make sure that my coupling here will clear that, so I'm centering it up. I've dropped my coupling in there to center that up, so I can be confident that that clears that nicely. So that trim ring is back in place now. And all I need to do is put a little spot of red paint there. So here I've got some red paint. It hasn't all dried in the container. Certainly skinned over. Alright, so I've just put a dot of red paint there. And that's basically dealt with. Then I've got to put my shutter back on here. Of course the shutter's all serviced and ready to go. So the shutter needs to be fitted back to the mount. So I'm just checking how this goes. I remember my flash wire needs to be resoldered, and it was, they'd done a particularly useless job of fixing it. What goes in here? There's a cover plate here. It must fit in a particular place. It probably fits right there. It does. There's a tab on this, and where your release button is at the bottom there, that's where that tab sits. Just drops into a slot. You can see it fits down neatly into the casting there, clears the detent for your shutter speed settings. If I set my shutter speed dial to something useful, like B is probably an easy place to find. My shutter speed dial right here is a slot in it which will couple to this piece here. So if I set my shutter speed dial round to the B position, in theory at least, this should all fit. There's nothing else needs to go in? Yes, of course there is. That's our rangefinder coupling. I'm just giving that a wipe with molybdenum paste. That drops into position. That runs through a tube in the shutter housing. Oh look, it even lined up. That's most unexpected. And our fixing screws. We have our one with the washer. That had a standoff, of course, because that has to hold the release on this side. Here's our release lever. Two screws here and here. If I recall correctly, some of these screws were loose when I started, so I'll want to make sure that they are locked so they won't come loose again. My shutter release, I really want to clean that. From memory this was a bit reluctant to move. Sticky grease I would imagine. That looks useful. Just pop that loosely into place and see how it all fits. That's it there. Where's that spring couple? That's it there, okay. Alright, So there was a plain screw at this point holding that bracket down into the case. We have a stud here. And that spring hooked up where? Alright, so I'll wipe a molybdenum paste on those slots. A light wipe on that surface there wouldn't hurt. And this little tab on the back, that's going to press on this lever, so I'm just going to put a wipe of molybdenum paste on there. That sits like that. A shoulder screw goes through at the top here. And our washer and screw at the bottom. Pass through that guide bush down into the housing. I'm going to tighten up all 4 screws that hold the shutter into the case, including this one, because this one does the job too. I'll just check that that shoulder screw's done up and everything looks correct there. And I have a return spring. And the return spring acts to pull the shutter release back up. So the shutter release pulls back up without any problem. I cock the shutter. That's working nicely. Nice smooth action. We set the self timer. That all looks good. Now these screws had worked their way loose, so I'm going to lock them with a touch of lacquer. When you're doing something like this, make sure you don't get the lacquer on a component that needs to move. So I'm just getting it there on the head of the screw and the washer underneath it. I don't want it to run down underneath, otherwise it'll jam this lever. That's all done, bar soldering in my flash sync wire, which I'll go and do.